Over 5,000 years of world history have carried the fascination of board games into modern times in sometimes curious ways. But what do pharaohs, landlords, and COVID have to do with it? Why aren't board games already history? Let's find out. As with many things in our modern world, the cultures and beliefs from antiquity to the present have influenced board games. Even though some game mechanics have survived to this day, 5,000 years ago, not everyone was allowed to play or even own board games. Many of the earliest excavations that brought to light games from ancient times are found in the Eastern Mediterranean or the ancient Near East of Europe. During the time when the first pyramids were being built, the first clear example of senet was found in the tomb of the first known dentist. Senet was played only by the elite and pharaohs. At that time, the favor of the gods meant everything. Senet was no exception. Luck in the game was equally seen as the blessing of the gods. Similarly, the royal game of discovered in ancient Mesopotamia in tombs of nobles and Sumerian kings, sometimes buried with their entire household, soldiers, and even wagons, reflected a belief that skill in the game ensured a prosperous afterlife. Moving forward, we travel along what would later become the Silk Road to ancient China, where beliefs were fundamentally different from those in the Eastern Mediterranean. Influenced by Confucianism and Taoism, the game of Go emerged, emphasizing strategy, discipline, and harmony. The game called Go in the West and Japan was one of the four arts of a Chinese scholar and was mainly played by such. It is one of the few games that survived the millennia and is still played today, known as one of the most complex games, with more possible board game positions than there are atoms in the observable universe. In Africa, communal life was valued over the life and class of the individual. This is reflected in the game Mancala, which was not only played by the elite, but also by children and the elderly. Mancala had a communal purpose, teaching arithmetic and strategy. Back in Europe, we find the predecessor of a game still played today, Tabula. The first record suggests that a Greek soldier invented a game to pass the time during the Trojan War. Ironically, his name was Alea, Latin for dice. It became a staple of ancient Greek society. Later, Chaturanga was invented in India, played by the nobility due to the caste system. It evolved into modern chess, spreading to the west. During the Middle Ages, games like Alcerca traveled from the Near East to Western Europe, evolving into drafts also known as checkers. In 1283, the first book about games issued by the King of Castile included instructions for chess, which is regarded as the first board game manual of Europe. A probable evolution from senet to tabula to a game called Irish led to the development of backgammon. This led to the long-held but incorrect belief that backgammon was the oldest known board game. In fact, backgammon only emerged at the end of the Renaissance. Despite thousands of years of development, many of these games were still in their initial stage regarding their rules and gameplay. A historical development that led to an increased emphasis on leisure time was the Industrial Revolution. During this time, the rules for chess and backgammon were particularly adjusted to match those we know today. The increase in public leisure venues and education reform, which led to higher literacy rates, gave rise to new approaches to board games, one of which was the Mansion of Happiness. In the 19th century, virtuous and moral teaching games like Snakes and Ladders, adapted from the Indian game, became popular in Victorian Europe. The beginning of the 20th century finally ushered in a modern era of board games. The financially perhaps most successful modern board game began with an idea from Elizabeth Magie, the landlord's game. As an anti-monopolist, Magie wanted to highlight the negative impacts of land grabbing, which could be avoided with Henry George's land value tax. For this reason, the game came with two rule sets, one that enriched monopolists and impoverished other players, and another that allowed all players to share their wealth. Charles Darrow was particularly fascinated by the monopolistic idea. After he played the game for the first time, he developed it into Monopoly in 1932. Magie's rights and patent on the game were eventually bought by Parker Brothers for $500 US. During World War II, a special edition of Monopoly was developed that included tools to aid prisoners of war in escaping. After the war, with the resurgence of the American dream and capitalism, the success of Monopoly knew no bounds. The idea that anyone could accumulate great wealth led to the game being sold about 275 million times to date. Post-war, many more games with greater depth and fun emerged: Clue, Risk, The Game of Life, Twister, and Dungeons and Dragons. I'm curious, what was the first board game you remember playing? Let me know down in the comments. The years around the turn of the millennium finally heralded the rise and commercialization of so-called Eurogames. These emerged particularly due to the post-war aversion to conflict-based games like Risk or Axis and Allies. The perhaps most well-known game that simultaneously ushered in the new era of board games was The Settlers of Catan. With the popularity and growing acceptance of geeks and nerds, board game ideas merged with video games, movies, pop culture in general, and vice versa. In 2012, only about 3 years after the founding of the crowdfunding platform Kickstarter, the funding for The Order of the Stick adventure game started, which was based on a webcomic and raised $1.25 million. Exploding Kittens followed with an equally explosive crowdfunding campaign, rising $8.7 million. These Kickstarter campaigns were essential as they paved the way for what was to develop during the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic further boosted board game popularity, with over 3,300 games posted on Kickstarter in 2020, about 2/3 of the total published games that year. With this vast array of board games today, our standards have also risen significantly. Board games led to video game adaptations and vice versa. Even achievements and unlockable content have found their way into board games, as recently seen with the successful video game and its board game counterpart, Dorfromantik. That board games can now also be played digitally as standalone games or tabletop simulator adaptations is nothing new. Nevertheless, they have persisted over the millennia, and even the information age never really detached them from the real world. Direct social interaction is a cornerstone of board games that cannot be overlooked. But the fascination lies not just in that. Being able to touch and physically move the game and its components, holding beautiful cards in hand and creating miniature worlds. That's what it's all about. The history of board games shows how closely they are tied to our culture and history. From ancient pharaohs to modern Kickstarter campaigns, board games have always found new ways to entertain and connect us. What are your favorite games and why do they excite you? Let me know in the comments. If you want to learn more about the controversial history of Dungeons and Dragons, from a basement game to a pop culture icon, you should definitely watch this video. If you enjoyed this journey through the history of board games, consider subscribing and hit the like button. It encourages me to create more exciting content. I'm looking forward to seeing you for the next Cerulean Tale.